15. Tin and Wolfram. When a Cornishman returns to England from abroad, the first thing he wants to do is to set foot once more on the soil of his native duchy, so I gladly accepted an invitation from a Cornish cousin to stay near my old home. Now I had always wanted to go down a Cornish tin mine, and this was finally arranged for me by my cousin, who introduced me to the manager of a group of mines. In Cornwall, the manager of a mine is known as the bal captain. Bal being the old Cornish word for a mine. The mine I was to go down was very deep, and some of the workings were under the sea. In consequence, it was very hot and damp, and, before I could be taken below, I had to change into a complete miner's outfit, because of the danger of getting a severe chill on leaving the heat below for the cold air above. This outfit was made of heavy white felt, with overalls above. The trousers were tucked into my own high rubber boots. I had a miner's hat fitted with a candle on my head, and a little bag carrying my divining tools in my hand. We went down into the depths of the earth in a skip, which is a sort of rough lift, fitted with a cage. Very unpleasant. When we reached the bottom, we found a group of miners near the shaft and another in a tunnel close by. They were singing, just as they used to sing when I was a child. Basses, baritones, and tenors were taking their various parts in perfect harmony, despite their lack of proper training, and the result was as beautiful as it had been when I was young. There is an interesting reason for the singing in Cornish mines. The tin lodes give off little jets of flame, and the miners believe that they are caused by the little people showing them where the tin is. The mine fairies loved music, particularly singing, but hated whistling. It is no exaggeration to say that if anyone had whistled in a mine, his neighbor would have brained him with a pick, regardless of the consequences. Many women used to be employed on what were called the tin floors on the surface, and their singing was as beautiful as that of the men underground. It was chiefly hymns they sang, for John Wesley has been a great influence in the lives of Cornish folk. The tin was mostly washed by women who, until recent times, only received 5 pence a day for their labor. Even as late as 1900 they only received a shilling a day. The bal captain spoke to the group of miners working near the skip and told them that I was a diviner and, as they had lost the tin lode, I might be able to find it for them. Whereupon they all downed tools and sat down themselves. They thought that the captain had dared to bring a foreigner into their mine. So I turned to the foreman and said in the real Cornish, "Come on, boys. Let's do this fitty-like." The foreman got up, and in a most truculent manner said, "What do you know about fitty-like?" I replied, "as Cornish as you are, and I was born in Redruth." In a moment they were all on their feet, talking at once and telling me where they had lost the lode and asking me to find it for them. The old prejudice against strangers was still as strong as when I was a child. I found working in a mine very difficult. I was so accustomed to working on the surface over a mine and getting my reactions through my feet, that to try and get into contact with anything over and through my head was utterly confusing. So I asked to be taken up to the surface again, and, when I had shed my most uncomfortable garb, I worked in the usual way. After finding the missing lode, I made a new and, subsequently, very useful discovery. I found that, by standing on one spot over a lode without moving off it, I could show anyone standing directly behind me which way the lode ran with all its twists and turns for several hundred yards in either direction. What I do is this: I have no tool and only use my bare hands. I walk off the lode for 5 or 6 yards and then turn and face it. I hold my arms and hands straight out in front of me and then walk towards the lode. My hands immediately begin to move up and down, the more rapidly and violently the nearer I get to the lode. As soon as my foot reaches the emanations given off the edge of the lode, I am forcibly turned and twisted around, until I get its true direction. Then my right arm swings in the exact line of the lode, and, if the lode curves to the right, my arm and hand curve to the right, and, when it curves to the left, my arm and hand curve to the left, and so on, following all the changes of direction for a considerable distance, perhaps several hundred yards. The underground manager had joined the mine captain on the surface and had stood behind me when I was working. I heard the captain ask him whether what I had drawn in the air with my hand was correct, and his reply, "As a matter of fact, it is correct, but how it was done is beyond me. And me too, said the captain. I would have had to make the same confession, if they had asked me. I certainly don't know how it works, but I gave up worrying about that long ago. It works, and that is what really matters. The next mine I visited in Cornwall was a Wolfram mine, worked from the surface. Wolfram is found in lodes, rather like tin, and is a very hard, shiny, black mineral and extremely heavy. It is scarce and therefore valuable and is used for hardening steel. This mine was at Castle and Dinas near Penzance. These so-called castles are some of the queer things found in Cornwall. They are not really castles in the ordinary sense of the word, but earthworks, to be found on many hill tops and obviously erected as fortifications by some prehistoric people. The loads carrying the Wolfram lay under one of these castles. It was a fair-sized mine and was in the charge of the same manager as the tin mine which I had just visited. I had never been on a Wolfram mine before, so it was an interesting experience. I discovered a second seam which I said would join the main lode, but I found that from that point onwards the ground was full of faults and disturbances which would destroy the Wolfram contents of the lodes and that it would be useless working there. In this I was proved correct. While the manager was talking to some of the miners, I climbed the hill to speak to an old man who was all by himself digging away as if his life depended on it. When I reached him, he leant on his spade and said, "Where be you from?" When I told him that I was born in Cornwall, he became most talkative. I said that there seemed to be a great deal of Wolfram in the mine, to which he replied in expressive but inelegant language that the place was fair lousy with it. He then went on to tell me that he liked working there by himself when all the other men had gone home. "But surely," I said, "it must be very lonely here, all by yourself with no one to talk to." "I might be never alone," he replied. "An old gentleman he do come and stand and look at I do talk to E, but he don't talk to I. E do wear some funny clothes, E do. Old-fashioned like. This old gentleman do spend hours walking about all round the place, like as if E did own it. I likes to have E's company E is." Then he gravely spat on his hands, seized his spade and went on with his frantic digging. I joined the manager, who seemed very disturbed and worried. A tin lode had just been found among the Wolfram lodes. Instead of being an added asset, as one might suppose, it was just the opposite, because it meant installing new machines in the mine. It appears that the two metals cannot be worked together and have to be separated by means of electromagnetic machinery. So far as I was concerned, my morning finished perfectly. I had a meal off a real Cornish pasty, unobtainable out of Cornwall, and a slice of saffron cake. I have wined and dined in many countries and tasted their world-famed national dishes, but to my mind Cornish pasty and saffron cake beat them all. The pasty has played its part in keeping the devil out of Cornwall. The Cornishman puts everything he can find to eat into a pasty and, as the devil was afraid that they might put him into one and have a fancy for devilly pasty, he never crossed the Tamar. Thus, the numerous Cornish saints, after whom so many hills and towns were called, were left in undisputed possession of the Cornish inland, while every possible place around the coast is called after the devil, who claimed the coast as his own. End of Part 15.